A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Yeah, it's easy to enjoy Hannibal Lecter. He's smart, resourceful, charismatic, and at times quite helpful. Most importantly, he isn't real.
Alferd Packer, however, was the genuine article. Newspapers called him a human fiend, a murderer, a man-eater, and eventually they settled on a title: The Colorado Cannibal.
And the people loved him for it. Denver 7's Stephanie Butzer tonight on how Alferd Packer became our favorite dark obsession.
He's best known as the man who cannibalized 5 men in the San Juans while guiding them to gold mines during the winter of 1874. And yes, while his name is technically Alfred according to court documents, he went by Alferd. It's a story as captivating as it is horrific, and somehow, from the safe distance of about 150 years, even humor has wiggled its way in. Packer's name is now associated with a cafe at CU Boulder, an outdoor cookbook, festivals, a musical, a play, a restaurant in Lake City where he emerged from the mountains alone, and more. A sculptor even created a bust of him that was temporarily put on display in the Colorado State Capitol, where, according to the New York Times, the governor said, quote, "Both he and Packer serve our fellow man, each in our own way." Of course, under this lightheartedness is the much darker story of how these 5 men died, though the mystery remains: was this premeditated murder or just desperate survival? After he was discharged from the Union Army for epilepsy, Packer moved west looking to strike it rich at the gold mines. When he was in his early 30s, he agreed to lead 21 men from Utah to Colorado to the mines. They started the trek in late 1873. Packer was the only one to make it out, so his tales, and the limited evidence available from the 1870s is all we have. In one story, Packer claimed he had been abandoned by the group. In another, his first signed confession, he said the men died one by one from the elements and the remaining men cannibalized them. Then there was the most well-known account he described, the second confession he swore to.
One of the stories that Packer told was that he was acting in self-defense, and he was just doing what he could to survive in the mountains during this winter. They were told not to go into the mountains during this time, so the party became lost and disoriented supposedly in the mountains. He emerged over 60 days later and looking fit and healthy. And it turns out that he was accused of having people's belongings that were part of the party and a lot more money than he probably should have. So upon further investigation, people found that his party was missing. The other 5 members of his party were missing.
Packer claimed he'd left camp one day and returned that evening to find one of the men, Shannon Bell, cooking meat over a fire and the rest of the men dead. And when Bell saw him, he ran at him with a hatchet. Packer, who had brought a gun with him, shot him dead. Then he was completely alone with the 5 men's bodies. According to a report from the time in the Lake City Mining Register newspaper, Packer couldn't eat the strip of meat that Bell had been cooking when he'd returned, but that changed by morning. Packer said he, quote, "gave up to it and cooked more to eat." He claimed to stay there for 60 days, regaining his strength before packing extra meat and leaving the camp in search of town. In April 1874, he walked out of the woods alone around Lake City. But he looked pretty healthy for someone who had just escaped the hands of death. Suspicion mounted quickly around town.
People realized that he had a lot more money and that he had some of the possessions of the people from the party when he returned and emerged from the mountains. And not that he was necessarily showing off, but that he was after such a trial in the mountains of being lost and, surviving on rosebuds and rose hips and bunnies, that he looked really healthy for a guy who had gone through such a horrible thing where everybody else died.
So people started asking questions.
Little special treat for you here at dinner time. All right, Chief